The case of Jennifer Jenny Klein is briefly covered in Missing 411, Western United States and Canada, on page 203 and 204. The whole case, as written in the book, is only 3 paragraphs long and doesn't contain what I would consider to be any egregious errors, besides that Paulides claims that police were immediately notified and blames dogs for their role in her disappearance. In stark contrast to the brevity of the case in the book, I received well over 100 pages of reports, communications, and other relevant documents that all discuss Jenny's case at length. So rather than my typical debunking type video where I'm making it to highlight issues with Missing 411, this video will be purely an in depth look at Jenny's case, simply because I have the material and I believe that it's worth sharing. So, without further ado, let's discuss the case of Jenny Klein. On May 25th, 1974, in the early afternoon, Jenny was with her mother, Mary Lou, her father, Howard, and her older brother, Jeff, on a camping trip near the Colorado River in a campground called the Big Bend. Jenny was just 3 years old at the time, and Jeff was 5. The Big Bend campground was very crowded due to it being Memorial Day weekend, and some newspapers and reports also note that there was a large number of people that the reports call transients, which typically see in reference to the homeless. But in this instance, I think that it might be more of a word for a sort of shady tourist, people not from the area who don't belong, if that makes sense. Although it is possible that homeless people were living near the campgrounds at the time. Jenny was playing near the river with her brother Jeff. From what I can tell, she was barefoot and wearing a light blue swimsuit. Their mother was nearby and keeping an eye on things. Meanwhile, her father had to go grab something from their vehicle. It was at this precise moment that a few things happened, more or less at the same time, and changed the Klein family forever. Jeff was playing with either a toy car or a matchbox. It's reported both ways, perhaps due to the toy car brand Matchbox, which was popular during this time, and Jenny wanted a turn with it. Rather than hand over his toy in typical brother fashion, he lobbed the toy into the river and walked away. Just then, a dogfight broke out nearby, prompting their mother to look away from Jenny to see what all the commotion was. I didn't see any reports regarding exactly how long Jenny was left completely unattended, but by the time her mother turned back to where Jenny had been playing in the sand next to the river, Jenny was already gone. Panicked, her parents searched around for her and called the authorities. The police, however, had a Memorial Day event going on and were woefully understaffed as a result. They did send out an officer to investigate, though, and he arrived on scene around an hour after the initial report was made. Due to the lack of personnel, the search effort was insufficient and crewed mostly by Jenny's family and friends, along with other volunteers. No trace of her was found, despite the search continuing until 10 p.m., assisted by searchlights pointed at the water's surface, and then resuming again at 6 a.m. the following morning, with the river being the main focus of the search. One of the reports that was made on the day, I believe it was from that first responding officer, stated that Jenny had fallen into the river and was swept away. No adults had witnessed this due to the dogfight, but the report references the testimony of a single child who claimed to have seen it happen. When combined with the toy that she wanted being flung into the river, and that she was already in her swimsuit right next to the river, it does seem like a likely possibility that she ventured into the water and lost her footing. The danger of the water was attributed to the river being especially high and fast during this time of year. In fact, just a couple of months later in July of the same year, a full grown 42-year-old man was swept away by the river in the same area that Jenny had last been seen. As the searches continued, newspapers picked up the story and immediately reported that Jenny had drowned in the river. This was the natural conclusion, considering that Jenny would have been the fourth person during that weekend alone to have drowned in Utah. Since her body was not found in the subsequent searching, however, authorities opted to perform an experiment. In the same spot where Jenny went missing, they put a dummy made with 2 milk jugs and a 35-pound sack of potatoes into the water. The point of the experiment was to see if the undercurrent would sweep the dummy down under the water or if it would be pushed along the surface. As they watched, the dummy was not pulled underwater, but it did get pulled downriver, as expected. After days of unfruitful searching, Jenny's parents came to the sheriff and asked him to file Jenny's disappearance as a kidnapping. The sheriff, who was already of the opinion that Jenny had clearly drowned and would not be found alive, began to look into the kidnapping angle, but it's not clear how much effort was actually put into the theory. At this point, changing theories to kidnapping would prove to be too little too late, even if it was thoroughly investigated. As I already mentioned, the initial search was very understaffed and inadequate for the task of locating a tiny 3-year-old girl in a crowded campground. There's no evidence that any of the vacationers were interviewed at the time, nor did they even have their names taken down for later questioning. So, if kidnapping was the real answer, there was almost no hope of finding a lead. An officer was assigned the case in 2003, about 30 years after Jenny's initial disappearance. He notes that he looked for reports and information regarding Jenny's case in their evidence shed because he could not locate any files or evidence anywhere else. He was able to locate a couple of reports, the contents of which I've already relayed to you, but he did find one more perhaps relevant piece of information. On October 28, 1978, more than 4 years after Jenny disappeared, there was a call from a neighboring sheriff's department that relayed information about a couple of hitchhikers that were picked up by a passing motorist in that area back in 1974. The hitchhikers were labeled as hippies, who were on their way to a commune. The interesting thing about them is that they also had a young girl with them who was about 3 years old at the time. Looking back, the witness says that this may have been Jenny. There was never any follow up documented. The case then goes cold for many years. The investigation in 2003 did little more than collect what sparse information that the original investigation had uncovered. From what I see, the vast majority of the focus was set on recovering the body from the river, with little or no attention paid to any other possible explanation. This, again, isn't necessarily odd, considering that the original report explicitly stated that Jenny had apparently waded into the water, slipped, and was swept away. Clearly, at least at the time, this was the stance that the authorities were going to adopt and stick with. In 2004, there was a theory investigated regarding a criminal by the name of Franklin Floyd. The case of Franklin Floyd could be a video in and of itself, as it is very complex. So, just be aware that you're getting a very abbreviated version here. Let me know if you're interested in a deep dive into his case, but I'll warn you that he was a very sick man and deserving of the death penalty that he was ultimately sentenced to. Floyd, also using the names of Clarence Hughes and Warren Marshall, among others, was convicted of kidnapping and raping several people, some of whom were children, and of murder, including a 6-year-old child that he claimed was his own at the time. He was known to be in the vicinity of Oklahoma City in 1975, and that's not so far away in the grand scheme of things from the Big Bend campground, especially considering the popularity of that area. Jenny would have certainly fit the profile for the type of victim that Floyd would go for, but I don't think that there's anything remotely concrete that he was actually involved in any way. He never confessed or inferred any involvement with Jenny's case that I've seen, but he was certainly capable of making her disappear. I will also say that I would doubt a campground as fitting the MO for the type of area that Floyd would look for victims in, but I haven't looked that deep into Floyd's case, so it's hard for me to say for sure. His inclusion in the public records return that I received seems to stem from a girl who is about the correct age for Jenny that was raised by Floyd after being kidnapped by him. She was abused throughout her whole life and was eventually killed in a hit and run after she tried to escape from Floyd when she was much older in 1990. However, that victim has since been identified as someone else, and Jenny remains missing. Fast forward to 2017, and we have a new development. A woman by the name of Michelle Hooper reached out to the news as well as authorities claiming to be Jenny Klein. According to her story, she was abducted from the campgrounds by someone who had committed a string of high-profile kidnappings and was more or less brainwashed during her captivity. NamUs, an organization that maintains a database of missing persons, was also contacted by Michelle, and they reached out to local law enforcement in the area where Michelle lived, Springfield, Illinois, to get a DNA sample and have the whole thing sorted out. To the surprise of the NamUs agent, authorities initially declined to collect Michelle's DNA for comparison. According to them, Michelle had contacted them as well as the FBI on a number of occasions claiming to be various missing persons in the past. They would collect her DNA only to have the results come back negative. In their opinion, Michelle was not trustworthy and was perhaps under the influence of some mental illness. Michelle didn't take no for an answer, though. She started a campaign on Facebook to get the authorities to test her DNA against Jenny's. With enough public backing, as well as a couple of interviews that she did here on YouTube with Nancy Schaefer from Missing in America, links below, she was able to pressure the police to collect her DNA. She then declared to Missing in America, and indeed everyone who would listen to her, that her DNA had come back as a 100% match to Jenny, something that, to my understanding, would have been impossible. DNA results had to be compared with Jenny's parents, as no DNA had ever been collected from Jenny herself, considering the time that she went missing as well as her age. The media, being what it is, pressured law enforcement to confirm the statements that she was making so that they could publish this bombshell of a story that Jenny had finally been found. Unfortunately, however, Michelle was not a 100% match as she had claimed, or a match at all for that matter. The lab results state that she is excluded as a possibility for being the offspring of Jenny's parents. The Missing in America videos are now taken down, which is why there aren't any links directly to them, just to other videos showing that they did exist. Sonia Klein, married to the now adult Jeff Klein, works in the Department of Justice herself and was able to relay what happened to her and her family as a result of Michelle's lies. Quote, "Here's how things went down on my end. We, the Klein family, were completely oblivious to this person, Michelle Hooper, and her claims until a stranger going by the name Jody Hope contacted my household, my in-laws' household, and emailed my sister-in-law on the evening of July 12th. Jody spoke with my mother-in-law on the phone. She asked her if she was the mother of Jenny Klein, and told her that there was a person who believed that she was Jenny. She told my mother-in-law to watch some YouTube video postings. My mother-in-law emailed me about the phone call minutes after hanging up. My husband, Jeff Klein, and I then played our answering message from Jody and also briefly looked at the YouTube video. We were all shocked and rattled. Our instincts were that Michelle Hooper wasn't credible, but my family was willing to consider it as at least a possibility. Since I work at the California Department of Justice DNA Lab, which has a special unit for missing persons, and my in laws had already submitted their reference samples to the DNA reference database back in about 2003, my reaction was to get DNA for comparing to Howard and Mary Lou, parents of Jenny Klein, to settle the matter as soon as possible. Early the next morning, July 13th, I called Jody Hope and asked where the DNA sample was submitted. She said she believed Springfield PD and gave me Michelle Hooper's telephone number. I called Michelle Hooper and asked her where she submitted her DNA sample, and she said Springfield PD, which sent it to Utah. I then handed this information over to senior criminalist Michelle Halsing in our missing persons unit. She called Springfield PD and arranged for a DNA collection kit to be sent there overnight for Michelle Hooper to submit a sample and return to the California DOJ for analysis and comparison. That afternoon, criminalist supervisor Matt Pucci called Grand County to follow up on your end and left a message. You know the rest from there. Michelle Hooper cooperated in submitting her new sample at Springfield PD, and our missing persons unit had it analyzed, compared, and excluded within a week of this first Jody contact. It was a tremendous relief for my family members to have an answer so fast, and they are very appreciative of the support of Grand County, Springfield, and the California Department of Justice. That's pretty much it on my end. I got one phone call from a woman named Molly Randall asking some strange questions on July 25th on behalf of Michelle Hooper. I didn't give her any information and told her to contact Grand County, Springfield PD, or the California Department of Justice Missing Persons Unit. Hopefully these people will accept the results and move on for all of our sakes. Close quote. And that last statement is interesting to me concerning another individual reaching out for more information and asking questions, as Michelle Hooper was noted by police as only knowing things that were readily available to the public concerning Jenny, which was a large part of why they didn't believe her. And that, unfortunately, is where we stand today. Jenny is still missing. Her body never surfaced from the river, nor has any kidnapping victim ever been confirmed to be Jenny. In my own mind, and this is obviously speculation, the most simple answer is that she was indeed swept away by the current and drowned, just as all the newspapers reported and the authorities at the time believed. Compared to being kidnapped by a monster like Franklin Floyd, drowning in the Colorado River would have been a mercy. So perhaps it's not just because drowning is the most likely answer that I subscribe to it, but also because I would not wish the alternative fate on anyone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.